Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sandhu. This video that you're going to be watching, it is a part of a series, two of them as a matter of fact. This is part 6 of my Bible history video series that I've been doing. The last one titled part 5 was, the part 5 was titled Lucifer, the Man Who Would Be God, His Real Story and the Real History of the Bronze Age. Now the Bronze Age in my studies is indeed the most closest to our own time, and it is also where most of the things that people teach happened in the days of Noah, such as the hybridization of different species, the creation of dragons, etc., and these wars that turned the whole world into a wilderness. These happened in the Bronze Age. Okay, so this Bronze Age and these artifacts that I'm going to be showing you, not artifacts necessarily, actually these stone constructions that are found all over the world that I'll be showing in this video, they were created mostly in the Bronze Age. The first two ages of creation, for those of you who have seen my series and those who haven't, they should go back and begin at the beginning from the Gold Age. The Gold Age was the most technical age and the most technological age, and it was something like the Atlantis in the sci-fi movies, the sci-fi series Stargate Atlantis, something like that, where it was constructed out of glass and metal and concrete, very sophisticated computer technologies, etc. But those worlds, they were destroyed during the Silver Age because of the wars that began once evil entered into God's creation. So this is the reason why, because there was so much warfare, that the inhabitants of the latter age, especially in the Bronze Age, they took to constructing just about everything out of stone. And these stone buildings, these stone monuments, they are littered all the way across the face of the earth. And that is the evidence that these things did happen in our past. These wars did happen. These destructions did take place, and not only was the earth destroyed more than once, but even the heavens have been destroyed in the past in the wars between the angels and the sons of God, men led by Lucifer. Okay, and those of you who have not seen my videos will not understand what I mean by sons of God, men. Okay, the sons of God in the book of Genesis and Job, they are not angels in the Bible. They are flesh and blood, much like us, okay, except they are not of the race of Adam. So I will stop this introduction now. This video actually I had done yesterday, but I just wanted to add this introduction to it, that this is part 6 of the Bible history series, but there is also a new series in its own right, which I have titled Angel, in parentheses, Star Wars, in the Strange World of Lucifer and the Dragons. So this will be part 1 to that series and part 6 of the Bible history video series. Before YouTube deleted my channel with some 300 videos on it, many of them on Bible history, I was in the middle of doing a new series on the ages of time that have passed before this present age. This present age began about 6,000 years ago with the creation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Okay, but many ages came before that, and in mythology, for example, these ages are identified by names of precious and base metals called the Gold, Silver, Bronze, and the Iron Age. Now in that series, I had gone to the end of the Silver Age and into the beginning of the Bronze Age. And because YouTube deleted my channel, it kind of interrupted everything because I had to re-upload a lot of the information. And now finally, I'm going to start continuing. I'm going to continue with that series, and I'm going to talk about the Bronze Age. What I have found in the very recent times, I would say, over the last year, although I began talking about Bible history, about these ages, about, a long time ago, 9-10 years ago already, but actively on YouTube doing these video series since about 2016, so about 2 years now. But even in the past year or so, there is so much evidence that is coming up from the geological record of this earth from the findings of people with these ruins and megaliths and all sorts of anomalous structures which exist in places where nothing should exist, and there is no explanation in mainstream academia as to who made these places, where did they come from, these gigantic size, how could even people, especially primitive people, build something like this? So that evidence is overwhelming now that, civilizations have come and gone right here on this earth that are not related to our present time. Anything in the past 5,000-6,000 years, these were not built then. They have existed from previous times and previous ages, and that of course proves that people and the earth has been inhabited by people that are corporeal, that they have bodies, they build things, not by angels. Angels are spirit, okay? They don't dwell on the earth. Their abode is up in the heavens, as the Bible tells us. So it is not like spirit creatures that built these. They were very much flesh, flesh and blood. Yes, I would say flesh and blood. So, and some of these people that are these inhabitants, whether they were people like we think of people today or not, is a question to which we don't have an exact answer. But it seems like they were somewhat in appearance similar to us, except some of them were apparently of very gigantic stature. Now in the Bible, in the book of Amos, we can read, God himself said, I cut down the Amorite whose height, I will put the link to that scripture in this video later. I don't have it in front of me right now, but he said, I cut down the Amorite whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oak trees. So these inhabitants were compared by God to the size of trees. Now the cedars which are mentioned in the Bible, they are the Cedars of Lebanon, and they do grow up to be to heights of some 40 meters or about 120 feet in height. Okay. Now we understand, when in more modern times, at the time of King David, for example, about 3,000 years ago, and 3,000 years ago will be modern times compared to the ancient history that has come and gone. And in the ancient past, we're talking about something like, maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years have gone by, maybe even longer. We don't know for sure, but it's certainly a lot longer than just 6,000 years, okay? So, but in the recent past, like at the time of King David, because that history is very well recorded, and we have it here at this moment in time, so we have a pretty good idea of what happened and what size people, etc., existed. When David fought with Goliath, Goliath is estimated to be by the size of his spear and his, weapons, etc., and the size of his shield and such things. It is estimated that he was about maybe 9 or 10 feet tall, which of course is very big. Even like a person like some basketball players like Shaquille O'Neal or something, who are maybe 7.5 feet tall, they are very, very big in comparison to the average sized person. So you can imagine somebody that's 10, 11, 12 feet tall, he is absolutely going to seem like a giant, and they were giants, and that's what they were called. But these creatures that we're talking about, this race of titans or other giants, they have been much bigger than that. And as I quoted to you from the Bible, everything that I presented has to be confirmed by the Bible, and that is why it's called Bible history. So when God says, that his height was like the height of the cedars, he was strong as the oaks. So, the comparison is to a very big and strong tree. That's what they were like, okay? So they were very, very big people, and that's why we have many, many structures and buildings on this earth that could not possibly have been built by even giants like 9, 10 feet tall. They had to be even bigger than that. So what I'm going to do in this presentation, which is going to be on the Bronze Age, I'm just going to do a short video, which is actually a video. Like I have so many of these videos, and I thank all the researchers that do these work on megalithic structures and other anomalies that exist in our world that are not explained by mainstream academics, that they do a lot of research. And there's a channel called New Earth that I found some very good videos. There are some others, that I've been watching and learning from. And one thing I do find is that most of these people, they're not coming from a Christian, bias or Christian understanding, okay? And a lot of them have some vague understanding of the Bible, but not they've never done a deep study of it. Okay, so they don't understand that this information that they are researching, it is actually all confirmed by the Bible. And I hope, that as I do these videos, some of these very people will be able to better analyze the information and understand, what they're looking at is why what it is, and when it was built, and why it was destroyed. So these are the type of videos that I'm going to do a whole series of, in which I will be taking some videos that are not mine, but that are excellent research, and I will analyze them for you using the knowledge and understanding that I've gained from the pages of the Bible. And then you will begin to see that the evidence of these worlds that I've spoken about, it really is truly overwhelming in this world, and there is no denying that something did exist before we came around. And if it did, then we have to understand, where does it fit in the history that is in the Bible, because it has to fit somewhere. And well, I'm glad to say that it does. Okay, so let's watch this video, and what I will do is I will stop it from time to time, and I will give you my commentary or my understanding of, because a lot of these people, they don't understand what exactly they're looking at, and that's what I will do. That I will give you my opinion, let's say, that this is what they are looking at, and hopefully you will agree with me that this is the most logical explanation as to what these things are and where they came from. Very recently, even in the last couple of years, a lot of these megalithic structures are being found in Russia. Russia, for the most part, is a wilderness country. A lot of forests and a lot of unexplored areas, and these are being found far away from major cities and right in the forests and wilderness of Russia. And a lot of people are familiar with all the megalithic structures in South America and Peru, for instance, and also maybe in the Middle East and in Egypt, etc., but not so much in Russia. And some of these videos that I will be discussing with you are going to be from these new finds that have been found in Russia. And what we are beginning to see now is that these megalithic structures, they are basically all over the earth. They're not just in one area. They're in Asia and Cambodia and India and China, in Mongolia, in Russia, in Japan. Everywhere around the world we see these here, which goes to again prove that the world at one time was inhabited, in just about every corner of it. And there was a uniformity in these structures. And what that uniformity proves is that there was a time when basically the culture and perhaps the language and even the government of the whole earth might have been under one entity or one person. In the Bible, of course, I believe that was Lucifer, as we read about in Isaiah 14, that he made the whole world as a wilderness. So I think the whole world was under his control, and that is the time before the time of Adam that a lot of these places were built, and a lot of them just served the purpose of military bases and structures, just like we have in the present day today. The Bible does tell us, there's nothing new under the sun. So this, what modern militaries and modern weaponries, etc., they are all from have existed in the past. They have been used in the past. And I do want to, once we get through this video, perhaps in the next one, I do want to discuss, why this building, when we know that they were very, very highly advanced technology, something like we read about the stories of Atlantis in mythology. And those worlds, the first worlds that came in the Gold Age and the beginning of the Silver Age, I envisioned them to be something like what we have today, made out of metal and glass and concrete, not out of these huge megalithic stones. And there is a reason why these construction techniques, as we progress from the Silver into the Bronze Age, they change to stone rather than those type of modern, structures that we have today. And, that's one topic that I will also address perhaps in future videos, because there's so much interesting information. I can't just cram it into one video. So let's get started on this one here, titled The Gigantic Megaliths of the Ural Mountains in Russia.
The region of Ural Mountains in Russia is still largely unexplored. The weather is cold. It is home to a number of nature reserves, which are not at all populated. There are no roads, no infrastructure of any kind. So it's not a surprise that only in recent times, photos and footage of the megaliths of Ural are now available to us. And in this video, we will present a very short overview of some of the megaliths. It all began with some tourists who by chance found some blocks with very right angles, having a badly beaten shape, just out in the wild where no civilization has ever been, according to the official Russian history. Not only do a large number of these blocks have many right angles, but moreover they are perfectly polished. Only the surface that has been exposed to the erosion on the outside has been overgrown with this green moss. And the surfaces that were inside, that were somewhat protected from the weather erosion, those are so smooth that the green moss didn't have anywhere to stick. It could not cover those areas. Besides stones with numerous right angles, a number of stones have been found with these cuttings, machine-like cuttings, which suggests the use of very advanced technology. Again, this is usually some 100 kilometers from any roads or known human activity. And with cuttings so deep, there is no question of any scientist going there in recent times and taking any sample, for example, because in our current civilization, we do not have the portable tools that could leave these types of marks. For example, the ones that you see on this particular photo. If these cuttings resemble anything, that would be other historic masonry work. For a comparison, you can see some photos of ancient stone cuttings found in Cambodia and some found in Russia. They are quite similar, actually. Not only the type of tools that left these marks are similar. On the left-hand side, you see a fragment of a Cambodian archaeological site. And on the right-hand side, you see some fragments of stones found in Ural.
So I just wanted to pause this here to make a couple of comments. First of all, looking at these photographs, it is just not possible to fathom the size of these stone blocks, okay? They truly are gigantic. And, like people like, some of you who might have worked in landscaping, etc., when you have to move stones, like for decorating a garden somewhere, for example. Some of those stones, they can weigh like a few hundred pounds or maybe 1,000 pounds or something like that. You know how difficult it is to move them, right? Even with our modern equipment, it is not an easy task. So even today, it would not be possible to go and lift these and move them to some other location. It's just not possible. So obviously that tells us that, these were not built by people that are our size or even using tools and technologies that we have today. So something else was being used to create them. Secondly, the observation I want to make was, which this person who was doing this commentary is saying, that there is a great deal of similarity between these formations. Whether they are in Cambodia or in Peru or in Russia, they have a great deal of similarity in the style of construction and in the style or the type of tools, etc., that seem to have been used to carve these and to cut them. Okay, and what that to me tells me is that as I read in the Bible, for example, in Isaiah chapter 14, about the world of Lucifer, in which it is told that he made the whole world as a wilderness. And in that time, just like in the time of Nimrod, it is quite easy to understand that they had one language and one culture. So again, that culture, the evidence of that culture being same across the earth is evidenced by such findings as this person is reporting. Okay. So it is my strong belief, and those who have not watched my Bible history videos may not understand this. But those who have will know what I'm talking about, that these structures were built sometime in the Bronze Age under in the world which was the world of Lucifer. And that world, as the title here suggests, was indeed a very strange world, which I will talk about in later episodes, inhabited by not just humans and big giant people, but also by, hybrid mythology type creatures, and even by dragons. Okay. So those are, I will not have time to go into that today, because today I just want to focus on this one particular video about these megaliths that have been found in Russia.
At various locations in the Ural Mountains, there are some kind of stone circles, which nobody has researched until now. After all, it is about a month's trek of very difficult walking through the mountains to reach those areas. There are no roads around there. Also, a number of locations with very regular shaped piles of rubble can be found. Again, sorry for repeating, but this is usually 100 or even a few hundred kilometers from any road or any known human activity whatsoever. Really out there, completely in the wild, very cold area. Hardly even the local tribes would venture in these particular regions. And these piles of rubble consist actually of very regular shaped stones that really must have come out of some sort of machine work. And the official explanation given to the public by the scientists is that the glaciers brought this pile of stuff from somewhere. However, this does seem quite ridiculous, as glaciers don't pile up in regular shapes in selected areas. They tend to scatter. Also, glaciers are not really known to have the ability to select stones of uniform size and arrange them in these geometric patterns. And also, some people suggest that there could be some sort of buildings underneath. And by the way, what you see in this photo is not grass. These are trees. So these are really large hills, a minimum of 20 to 30 meters in height, and some of them even higher.
I would like to add my agreement to this, commentator's conclusion that these explanations that are given by mainstream academics, that this was done by glaciers. For example, they tell us, that the Great Lakes were carved out by glaciers, which is just a totally insane idea, but because they cannot admit in the evolutionist Big Bang model, that there may be some sort of intelligence involved in our creation, and that advanced civilizations have existed on this earth in the past, and not Neanderthal man. That is, of course, a no-no. Okay, that is the reason why they will never, allow any of their academics to go out and teach such ideas as you see in these videos and on my channel, that worlds before our own have existed. They had some very sophisticated technologies, and they built some really fantastic structures which we cannot even build with our modern technology today. And the other thing he was pointing out about those hills of rubble, they are more like mountains, like what he said about these photographs. Like I said before, they're not that clear to make out as to the size and dimensions of these things. But when he said that those in what looks like grass in the background is actually trees, and these can be like 30 meters, which is like 100, nearly like 90 feet high. Okay, so they are not like small. They are not like small piles of rubble. And who knows? Like if one was to dig underneath and do an actual excavation, one might find that there's some kind of mines underground. Okay, from which all this rubble has come out, or there might have been some kind of smelting activity that was going on. There might even be like some sort of underground factory or something. Who knows? Who knows what caused these things here? I don't know that. But again, this does raise questions which are not asked by those people who have been dumbed down by modern education. I would also like to add, that these structures and these finds, they are, in my very, very, very strong belief, not from the time of Noah. Okay, the world of Noah, from Adam to Noah, was a period of time of roughly 1600 years. But the amount of construction that we find on the earth, not just on the earth, inside the earth and inside the waters, it is so extensive that there is no possible way that all of that happened within a period of some 1,000 years or so. Because by the time, Adam's race grew enough in population, they would at least 500-600 years would have passed. So, and then they would have at best about 1,000 years to go all over the earth and build all these giant structures. That I do not believe is logical, and I am quite certain that it didn't happen in that age, but it happened in the age prior to the formation of Adam, and before, when we read in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And then in Isaiah 14, like I just quoted for you, that he made the whole world as a wilderness. And again in Jeremiah 4, we read, that the world, the cities had been broken down, and there were no inhabitants left. And we read in 2 Peter chapter 2, that, or chapter 3, that the heavens themselves, Peter says that the heavens which are now, it indicates that even the heavens themselves are not the same as they were in the original creation. So the Bible supplies more than enough evidence, which I have already collated for you in my previous video, so I won't repeat that here, that this is not, Adam was neither the first inhabitant of this earth, and this present world, even the world of Noah, was not the first world that existed on the earth. One of the problems that these researchers have, and they do excellent research, so I commend them for that, but one of the problems that they have is that they don't know how to interpret their, or what conclusions to draw from their research, okay? They do not understand, okay, if I say, yeah, these things they exist and they were built, but they don't know who built them. And then, as you shall see a little bit later in this video, he talks about wars and, destruction taking place. And that actually is another video I'm going to use, probably the next part that I do to this one here, that, there's a great deal of evidence of some very, very catastrophic destruction having befallen these worlds, okay? And they don't know what happened. And now, let me just read to you quickly from 2 Peter. The book of 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 4. This is the Apostle Peter writing. He says, and saying, he's talking about these scoffers that are prophesied to come in the last days, that are, scoffers. And keeping in mind that the last days began 2,000 years ago with the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that these scoffers have always been around, but especially in the latter times of the last days, these scoffers are going to increase in number, as they have, like today, anybody that has a university degree, they scoff at such ideas. They don't even want to sit down and listen and to see the evidence. No, we've been told that we evolved from monkeys and that's all there is to it. We don't want to hear anything else. All right, that's their problem. I don't want to really concern myself with what people want to believe and what they want to teach. That's their problem, and, of course, they'll answer to God one day, and I don't have any problem with what they're doing. That is their problem. But what did Peter say? He said, these scoffers are going to come, and they're going to say, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. But Peter is going to correct these people. He's going to tell them, hey fellas, you don't know your history. If you did know your history, you would know that what has happened in the past, that, these worlds that existed, they were destroyed. Their judgment did come. These scoffers are going to say that, God's judgment never is going to befall this earth. And Peter is going to correct them and say, not only is it going to befall them, I'm going to show you that it has already happened in the past. And we are not talking about the judgment at the time of Noah. Because in verse 5 we read, for this they are willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old. See, what he's talking about here is not just the earth. In the time of Noah, the earth was destroyed, no doubt, but nothing happened to the heavens. The sun, moon, and stars that were shining above Noah's world when the flood was going on, they're still above our world today. But here, Peter is saying they are willingly ignorant of that by the word of God the heavens were a fold, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, exactly as we see it today, that, the land masses, they sit on water and they sit out of the water, okay? Number 6, whereby the world that then was overflowed with water perished. Being overflowed with water perished. And people always think this is the flood of Noah. But this is not the flood of Noah. This was the flood of Lucifer, okay? Which is quite different, and it was far more catastrophic than the flood of Noah. But the heavens, look at verse 7 though, but the heavens and the earth which are now. In verse 5, he told us that the heavens were a fold. And then he said something happened to those heavens, not just the earth. So, but the heavens and the earth which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So he said, just as it happened in the past, that those heavens and that earth was destroyed, so will this one. And this was not a reference to the times of Noah, because nothing happened to the heavens in the time of Noah. So my friends, you researchers who don't know how this destruction came about, it came about as a judgment of God for the wickedness of the people and those races that inhabited the world in those days. And that world, as our title suggests, was indeed far more stranger than any mythology movie you might have seen or anything you might have read. It was far more abominable and far stranger than anything that we have seen in the present time.
So, what is this? Is it a leftover product of mining activity done by a civilization unknown to us, or are there really buildings buried underneath? Yeah, there remain just too many unanswered questions. And another photo again from the Ural Mountains. Besides the beautiful rocks in the front, if you look at the mountain range in the back, one of the peaks is actually black, and it has quite a regular shape. Actually, this is a black pyramid made out of quartzite. A number of researchers have attempted to get nearby. However, many of them tell these stories of meeting strange entities, even in broad daylight, some of them. And these entities, they did not advise them to get near to the pyramid, and that is why it is still largely unexplored.
Okay, I just wanted to make a comment on this. These entities that are allegedly encountered by these people when they come close to these pyramidal structures in those mountains. As I said in this video and in the title, that the world that existed was indeed a very strange world. That is when these hybridization of creatures, mythological creatures, when you have like the centaurs, etc., horses body, man's head, and such things, satyrs, goat's body with a man's head, all these kind of things, they did happen in reality. And some of these structures that exist, they probably were those genetic factories where these things were manufactured. But that does not mean that this world that we see on the surface today, it is not as strange, this world is not as strange as that world, no doubt. We don't see these kind of things running around. But that does not mean that things that existed in that time, they still do not exist in some form or the other somewhere in this earth, okay? They not necessarily may be on the surface, or they may be because, like in Russia, for example, as is showing, like most of these areas are still unexplored. And there is so much surface area of this earth, surface area we're talking about, not even the underwater areas that have not been explored, that, anything could be existent out there. You go to the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, etc. Those are basically uninhabited places for the most part. This is in North America, which is a very well explored place. So we do not know what exists. But what we do not know for sure is what exists inside the earth. And one thing this is going to happen in the days of the book of Revelation, when those days began to come to pass, that this world will indeed become more and more strange, just like the world of Lucifer was. For example, we can read in Revelation chapter 9 in chapter 9, and the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from the heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. What is this bottomless pit? We don't exactly know, but it surely exists because the Bible tells us that it does. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. So obviously this pit has some kind of, smelting or something going on, that it creates this enormous amount of smoke, like more than any volcano, that it even darkens the sun and the heavens. Okay. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. Now, when you read the descriptions of these locusts, they're not like locusts that the insects. They are certainly some sort of hybrid creatures. Okay, so, and not only that, in Revelation 13 we can read about the beast that comes out of the water, and then the beast that comes out of the earth. So the earth is still a very strange place. It is just that in the surface world that we dwell upon, we don't really encounter these entities and these other things, some of them very physical, that still exist here. And but I believe in the days ahead, we will certainly get to see at least some of them.
And here are a few more photos of this black pyramid made of quartzite. This material itself has very peculiar qualities. It has a tendency to store static electricity and release it into the atmosphere only when certain conditions are present. You can see some kind of entry at the foot of this pyramid. It is said to be some kind of mine, maybe. However, Nikolai Sabotin, the gentleman you see lecturing on the subject, well, he did his best to find any information on any mining activity. However, nothing like this has been recorded anywhere in the region nearby for the last couple hundred years. So that entry inside is also a mystery.
So again, like that opening looks like an entrance to a mine shaft for sure. And the problem is that with these, a lot of these megalithic structures, as we shall see in some of the other videos, their exploration and anything that is going to challenge the official narrative, which the god of this world, Satan, has woven for the sleeping masses, that you're just evolved, your daddy's a monkey, and they buy it without any question. That is strongly discouraged, and people, especially in the academic world, they're not financed if they want to go see these things. And people like us, how the heck are we going to go exploring through this? He said, it takes like a month of trekking just to get to these places. How are we going to explore this? When you look at the wilderness, and I used to live in British Columbia, so I know like how vast those forests can be. It's not an easy thing for an average person to go and do. So therefore, we rely upon these experts, but the experts, all they do is they spin us stories and never the truth. So this could probably like one of these ancient mines, which again, just based on the size and of the stones, etc., it is highly, 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 highly unlikely that this was created or dug out at any time in the recent, in the modern era, which begins about 6,000 years ago. Therefore, it must have been done in the ages past. I also want to add, although that this looks like a mine shaft, it may not necessarily be. It could be like one of the underground, these days, nothing new under the sun. There are a lot of underground military bases, in my video, Underground World. And I had done some interviews on my old channel with Richard Sauter, who's done a lot of research on this. And I guess I should repost those at some point in time. But this could be like a base. It could be like a genetic laboratory where all these, hybridization and all these things going on. Who knows? And one of the things I speculated in the past was that hell, which is very much mentioned in the Bible many times, it is a place inside the earth, okay? And it was not something that God made, in my belief, that it was dug out during these wars that happened in those ancient ages, wars between angels, wars between men, wars between these different creatures, even involving these dragons, satanic dragons, okay? And this picture that you're looking at with this opening, it could just may have been a dragon's den, who knows, okay? So these are the kind of things to which we don't have the exact answers, but if we were able to explore them, we might be able to understand more. But nonetheless, again, I emphasize the point that none of this, in my opinion, in my strong belief, is anything created in modern times. And by modern times, I mean the last 6,000 years. They go back a lot further than that.
And now we are off to the next destination. This megalith is a large wall. It is the height of a 12-story building, and its sites point directly to the north and the south. The location is called Chortovoy Gorodishti. At least I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's actually only 6 kilometers away from a village, so it is accessible. On this photo you see the blocks that make up the foundation of the building. And it is a building. It's got 4 lines of blocks along its base. And all around you can see the building blocks that were used. In the construction, they're very well shaped, having a parallelepiped kind of form. So there is no question of some strange geological formation. This is a wall made of regular shaped stone blocks. Around the wall you can see some things similar to this one here on the photo. Megalithic structures looking like entries to some sort of underground tunnels or something like that, which still have not been excavated to this day.
So those of you who are interested in this topic and you watch these videos on these old megaliths and other anomalies that exist upon our Earth, one thing in common that you will see is that a lot of these, like in Egypt, for example, a lot of this construction is underground. Okay, it leads into places inside the Earth, and most of these are unexplored, or if they have been, we are not told what has been found inside them. And in a lot of places, for example, in Peru, in the city of Cusco, they have actually blocked the entrances to these tunnels, and there are like hundreds of miles of these tunnels and other caverns that are under a lot of those ancient cities, like in Egypt, for example. Okay. So it is somewhere, a lot of these openings, they lead into the underground worlds that, in my belief, exist unto this day. For one thing, there's way too many stories and legends about these creatures, not just human or humanoids, yes, humans as well, but, in other cases, humanoids and dwarfs, and which this guy will mention in a minute. A lot of these and other strange creatures, that have been seen around these openings. So what kind of worlds exist inside the Earth? We have no idea, but they certainly do. And also want to mention that this presenter said that this wall that he showed is 12 stories high. Now, next time you're downtown or somewhere in your city, go take a look at a building that's like 10, 12 stories high. See how high it is, okay? So again, these videos, it's hard to imagine, it's hard to actually fathom the size of these structures, but they are gigantic. And secondly, these stones, the way they are piled up on top of each other, we don't know how big they are, but they're quite gigantic, okay? And this may not have been the original way this was constructed. There may have been, some other material that was in between these stones. It could have been like a building or something, but when they met their end or they were destroyed, some of those materials may not have, survived, and therefore these stones, they piled up on top of each other. That is definitely one possibility, because these were certainly destroyed very, very catastrophically, as we can read in Jeremiah chapter 4:26. I beheld, and the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down in the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger. These cities are gigantic. They have existed, and in places like South America, which is mostly unexplored, especially in the Amazon jungles, who knows, what size of cities and ruins that one would find if one could actually go through and explore it all. One more thing I wanted to say about this wall, which is a theme that will be repeated in many of these videos, is that some of these stones, they may not necessarily be in the exact shape that they were in the building or whatever structure they were a part of originally. Okay, they seem to have a molten look to them, which is quite possible that they were subjected to such intense heat that that they have melted literally and then reshaped and or cooled down and become solid again. And that you can, if you look at them closely, you will see that molten lava flow type of signs are everywhere on these blocks and that wall that is allegedly 12 stories high.
And we are off to the next archaeological site. This one is called Popov Ostrov in the same district of Russia. Popov Island is the translation of the name. And one can see a number of stones that bear signs of human activity. For example, you can see here a row of steps, a staircase. Obviously, this is not a natural phenomenon. However, nobody knows of any civilization that has ever lived around here. And please pay attention to the picture on the bottom right with the round holes there. Very similar types of holes have been observed on megalithic sites all over the world. And all of these sites are badly damaged as if by a war or some kind of military means. Very similar types of holes have been observed on megalithic sites all over the world. And all of these sites are badly damaged as if by a war or some kind of military means. And all of these sites are badly damaged as if by a war or some kind of military means.
So again, these researchers, they do excellent research, but as I said, a lot of times they're not able to make sense of their own research. For example, this man is correctly observing that a lot of these megalithic sites, they show signs of like bombardment, for example. And that's what he's trying to tell you, that those holes are some sort of, holes that have been created by some sort of projectiles hitting them, okay? Artificial projectiles, not just these meteor showers and all that, are just these fictions that have been created to make us believe, that all these things just happen naturally. Like, the Grand Canyon is just like a big asteroid or a big meteor hitting it and it created this big hole. No, that's not how those things happen. A lot of those holes were actually dug up using equipment, and if they were damaged by some sort of explosives or some sort of projectiles, they were not natural things. They were actually created by some intelligent beings, some of them humans, some of them not. And that is exactly when he says, this is signs and evidence of some sort of warfare that has occurred. He doesn't know like who was at war. But as I have told you, like in my Bible history video series, you can go back and visit them. One, for example, that was titled The Wars of Men and Angels. That, one thing that happens is when people become greedy of power, what it always leads to is warfare. So in the Bible, we can read that the anointed cherub, he had power went to his head and he started thinking himself as God. And the same thing then happened to Lucifer. And yes, they believe that did exist simultaneously at some age in the past, in the Silver Age perhaps, and into the Bronze Age. And eventually, that's the more power one individual or one nation or one area acquires, the more they want. And these angels, they had wanted to conquer and subjugate all of God's creation. And some of these creatures, as God says, he turns one evil person against another. And that is what happened. In the end, these angels and men, they had wars. And these fights, men, by men I mean Lucifer and his armies, okay? They were armies of men or man-like creatures who are genetically compatible or similar to us, although they had far superior technologies, and they also had some other, perhaps in their physical strength, etc., they might have been greater in strength than us. And it is during those wars that all this destruction happened, and God used one faction, one group, one sect against another, and that is how Jeremiah 4:26, for example, came to be, that all the cities were broken down. This is very much true in the Bible. We read particularly in the history of Israel how God will use one nation against another, one empire against another, And that is where these wars, that's what these wars were. When exactly they happened, we are not 100% sure as far as the date of those events is concerned, but they obviously lie in the past, and that is how they came to be these ruined wildernesses. And that's how some of these rocks, they show signs of projectiles. Some of these buildings, they show projectiles hitting them. Some of them are like molten, and that is because the weapons that they used were quite fantastic, far more advanced than anything that we have even today. And the destruction that they caused all over this earth and into the heavens, because it was not just the wars on earth, it was the wars between these angels and men that I have documented, that it stretched right into the heavens, which was the reason why 2 Peter 3 tells us that the heavens of old have been destroyed, and now we're living under the new heavens.
And on to our next destination, an archaeological site that has been discovered actually in the autumn of 2013. The name is Gornei Ashoria. It means Upper Sharia. And what is very remarkable about this site is that until now, Baalbek was famous for having the biggest megalithic stones known to us. Actually, now the situation has changed because the stones in Gornei Ashoria would be roughly 10 times bigger. By visiting there, one really gets the feeling that these stones were soft when placed next to each other. And again, very similar to the previous site, there are these tunnels that, well, nobody knows where they lead, but they are around the structure. And another parallel with the Peruvian megaliths are locations with molten stone. The stone appears as if melted. However, nobody can explain exactly how that happened.
So again, a lot of these buildings that they show with these somewhere leading to inside the earth, a lot of these openings are not that big. So obviously, these places would not have accommodated some of those giant people that we read about. So these, were they meant to be a habitation for human-like people, or were they meant for some other type of creature, let's say for dragons, for example? And before we start discounting these things here, we should not, because the dragons, which is Satan, is called a dragon in the Bible, they are real. And this dragon race, they were not necessarily like, how we see in movies, etc. Some of them might have been that. But they did also come in some sort of humanoid kind of shape as well. And I'm sure that, they were able to construct, or if they're not themselves, then they were able to be enslaved people to do some of these constructions for them. So as I said, this world that we live in today is very, very strange as it is. And it is very impossible. It is nearly impossible for to imagine that world that existed on this earth, not just humans, but also these other fantastic mythological creatures, like I said, the centaurs and the satyrs and other fantastic hybrids, which we can't even picture in this day and age, okay? And also, of course, the dragons and the reptilians, all of them were existing at that same time in that world. And that is why I called it the strange world of Lucifer and the dragons. But the dragons were not the only creatures, like the strange creatures that inhabited that world. There were many, many more. And secondly, when he talks about, again, these stones being melted, of course, like that is, I believe, that probably few, if any, of these buildings, especially from back in that Bronze Age, there may be some of these megalithic, smaller megalithic buildings that might be survivors from Noah's age, because they did have giants in those days as well. But the older ones from Lucifer's time, they probably all have been subjected to some sort of, very fierce heat. And therefore, that is where this molten looking shape that a lot of them show comes from. They are not like, as a result of any natural process. They were all because of some sort of, weaponry being deployed that caused them to be molten and end up in the shape that we see today.
And by the way, since we're talking about molten rocks, let's go to Sodom and Gomorrah, the legendary cities. That's what you see here on the screen. Let's see if we can find some parallels, because this is a site where there are molten stones as well. At some locations, the stone is melted down to 50 centimeters deep. You can just imagine what kind of temperature there must have been to melt these stones so severely. Those of you who are familiar with the Bible probably remember what the God did to Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, he destroyed them by throwing fire and sulfur from the skies. This is what the Bible says. And a modern excavation done some 10 years ago really did find balls of sulfur that have literally bombed the city from above. Now, the interesting thing about these sulfur balls, you can see them on the photo, they're kind of white, and they leave these kind of circular holes, these damaged areas in the stone. Well, the purity of this sulfur is above 90%. While in nature, sulfur is found to have a purity of only 30 to 40%. So obviously, this sulfur that rained from these skies was a technologically produced substance. The entire area of Sodom and Gomorrah is just full of these white balls. And this is a very important artifact, actually, of an ancient weapon that was used. And by the way, the round formations from Ural, if you remember them on the screen, it's more likely that they had a similar origin. Although the official science says that every stone that has a round shape carved into the stone is some sort of sacrificial vessel for holding the blood of the victims. However, there is no factual evidence to support such statements. So despite them telling us this, we see in this case destroyed structures. We see similar signs of damage, and we can see these parallels with sites all around the world. South America, Sodom and Gomorrah, and Ural. So the version of the story that these are actual traces of ancient weapons has more factual support. And if you look at the photos on the screen, you will see locations from all around the Earth, and you can see they have similar damages. Some kind of round objects hitting the stone and melting it. So who knows, we could definitely make a hypothesis here that these were some of the weapons by which the destruction of a number of megalithic sites occurred.
Okay, now we can read in Genesis chapter 19, verse 24. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Brimstone is sulfur. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Now we do not know how far Lot's wife was behind him. I mean, she could have been like a fair distance away from him, and which, when she stopped and to turn around and look at these things here, and perhaps she was close enough that she herself was turned into this sulfur and fire, whatever type is. Apparently the sulfur that they found there in that region is of a very high degree of purity, and it can still be ignited to this very day. That it creates the human body. It's some kind of chemical process turns and basically makes a powder out of it. And a lot of these things have been observed in these in our world today, where there are things that have been petrified. For example, you heard of petrified trees, which means that that the tree which was wood at one time has been turned into stone. And the evidence of this sort of activity going on, which is not what you would consider to be a natural process, but has been and some sort of destruction that has been rained down upon the earth is everywhere. And the evidence of bombardment by some sort of in sulfur, these balls of sulfur that have been found in that area of Sodom and Gomorrah, they still are there. And these holes in all those buildings like he was showing you, they are in almost in all of these megalithic structures. So this is again evidence, okay? This is evidence that what the Bible tells us is the truth. And the problem is that most people don't know what's in the Bible, so they do not understand that these histories and these details about what our ancient past really was all about It can be learned from the pages of the Bible. We only need to search and dig deep in it.
And another interesting location in Ural. What is this? Is this a natural formation? Or maybe when the rocks were still soft, one of the giants, which the legends tell us of, stepped there maybe? We don't know. Another one of the interesting locations in the Ural Mountains is Divea Peshara. Although this cave is not yet studied completely, the number of witnesses reporting dwarf-like creatures around it is really overwhelming.
The legends and stories of dwarfs, especially in the underground realms, and being involved very heavily in mining and metallurgical activities, they are to be found all over the world. And of course, dwarfs are made very famous in the works of Jrr Tolkien, for example, in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings. And I believe this picture is probably from on the screen is probably from one of his movies, okay, that were made based on these books. So when this person, he's saying that a lot of people are reporting dwarf-like creatures around these caves, and they have been reported all throughout history. Like, are there like worlds or realms under the earth in which we do have these dwarf-like creatures that exist to this very day? Who knows? But it is not something that we can dismiss out of hand, because in my belief, whatever is possible and whatever can exist, it probably does. Whatever we can think exists, it probably does.
And the witnesses who report these sightings are actually really reliable and honest people. And it is really quite a few of them. One thing that is always greatly puzzling is the fact that being a witness in court, if many reliable sources are said to have seen something, that is accepted as the truth. And yet, in other cases, when many reliable sources swear to have seen something that does not fit with the official history or the official picture of reality that the mass media is implanting in us, then everybody just seems to believe the mass media that this is all fantasy. So this sort of double standard of most people is really rather puzzling. Now here's another artifact from this region, which is kept in a small local museum. This is a human tooth, and the test results show that it is human, so there are no doubts about that. However, the strange thing about it is the size of it. It is 1.5 times the size of normal human teeth. So the ancient legends about the giants, and there are many of them in this region, could actually be the truth.
This doesn't really look like a human tooth to me, but maybe it's just a picture is with the coloring and everything. It doesn't really display it like what we normally perceive what we normally, see human tooths to be. But anyhow, nonetheless, what I wanted to say was, that all these research and all this evidence in this day that is coming forth, it really does support, what the Bible has been telling us all along about these worlds that have existed, about these creatures that have existed, whether they're dragons or satyrs or unicorns, or these other creatures that are inside the earth, that are inside the waters, in even in the heavenly places. It is all there, except people, of course, they have been so conditioned, they have been so dumbed down, I should say, by the education system, by the mass media. That's all they get all day long is propaganda, that for most people, they just don't have any idea of what is true and what is not.
Another small mystery of the Ural Mountains. This is an ancient sign. It usually means something like the female or the beginning. It is a sign of a woman, and it actually sticks out of the stone. And it is not even stone. It looks like stone, but it is actually some kind of metal. And when Nikolai Sabotin tried to take a small sample of the material, he actually broke his instruments. And this is a map of some of these sites mentioned, so you can see their proximity to each other. And by the way, somewhere in this area years ago, somebody tried to build a military base or something. And for whatever reason, they selected a place, and the local shamans there told them that they could not build in this region, that this is a sacred place. But of course, nobody ever listens to them, so they built their base or what have you. But it was a complete disaster. Every month they had to make repairs on their electronics and electrical wiring, and this was because the entire area was completely electrically charged, or something like that. It was almost as if they were sitting on some kind of huge power generator. Everything they tried to touch was just charged with static electricity. It was just sticking to their hands. All of their equipment was just shorting out and shutting down. And actually, in a few months, they were forced to leave the place. It was simply not possible to do anything there because of the static electricity that was just everywhere. And another interesting thing in Ural is a number of leveled platforms. They look as if someone has cut the top of the mountain and leveled it into a flat platform. And these are the size of, let's say, 4 football fields. And the platforms are not only perfectly leveled, but they are also completely cleaned of any large or medium-sized stones. And unfortunately, the photos of these platforms are not very clear. But still, if you pay attention, you will notice something. And here's our next destination. It is a gigantic wall, and it is called Arahalsky Shaitan, in the districts of Chelyabinsk, again in the region of Ural. But here we have ongoing archaeological work. The style, you can see, is very similar to other locations shown. And this wall is 80 meters high, which is something like a 30-story building. And in some places, if you stand at the top and look forth from this wall, the view is simply amazing. It's completely breathtaking. That's how people describe it. Well, thank you for listening. We hope this has been interesting for you.
So this is the last segment of the video that I've linked in the description. You can see it all together in one piece if you like. And I want to, again, thank these people that do this type of research. And they post these videos. They are very, very helpful to bring us greater understanding. I just, hope and pray that some of them will come to understand that this is all the doing of God, the creator of all things, that these things have happened because they all fit into his plans and purposes. And a couple of comments I want to make about this here is when he was talking about the place that was the metal, that they found, and he couldn't take a sample out of it. It was basically so hard, I guess. And that is also reports that we hear all the time about these fantastic metals and alloys that are really, not found in our world at present. And also this reports of electricity, electrical, generation, and evidence that electricity has been used in the past. They are also very, very common. And that wall that he told you is 80 meters high. That's like over 200 feet, almost 250 feet high. That is again a structure that most people today would not be able to build. Anyhow, I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation, because I really believe that a lot of these things, because our minds have been conditioned not to believe the truth, that we really have a hard time processing this information. But nonetheless, it is in your Bible, and when you begin to study it, my videos are a very, I think, useful tool for you to guide you along. Then you will begin to understand how history makes sense, how our world makes sense, how all this evidence that is scattered all over the world makes sense, and where, and why these things are the way that they are. But just the fact that they exist, it is proof positive that, our world, the present day, is not the first world that has existed upon this earth. Thank you for listening. This is Paul Sandhu.
worlds be touched by the madness in